This is Gemara Menachos, Daf Tzadi Aleph, and we're holding on the top of Tzadi Aleph, Amid Aleph, and we're middle of a little bit of a lengthy exchange, figuring out the shitais in the brisa. So we're going to dive right in, pick it up in the top of Tzadi Aleph, Amid Aleph, and hopefully very quickly we'll be reminded of the sugya. So we finished off with the top line, and therefore command siv yachtav dami, and that's why Rav Yonasan was of the opinion that we needed a pasuk to teach us that one does not need to bring both animals to fulfill the neder. Says the Gemara, but what about Rabbi Yeshaya? Well, Rabbi Yeshaya, dami. According to Rabbi Yeshaya, Sadi Aleph, Amid Aleph, 3 lines down, even without saying Yachtav, it's as if it says it, Libai Kra. So we should need a pasuk to teach that only one animal is necessary. Says the Gemara, no. In fact, the Torah spells it out in 2 different scenarios. Shows us, according to Rabbi Yeshaya, that we don't need an extra pasuk to show us that the din by nisachim that we're discussing. Ve'edach. And what does Rabbi Yonasan say? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam she'hakol Ve'edach. Haksev Ve'edach, excuse me. According to Rabbi Yonasan, what does he hold? Itzrech. We need the pasuk by the nisachim to show us that even with one animal, you can fulfill your neder. Why? I would think, Hani mili b'mefarish. I would have thought that when did the psukim apply? When he said explicitly that I'm going to bring either minat or either minat or minat bakar. That's when you could bring one. Aval, 6 lines down, bistama, lacy mitervayu. Maybe the stama would be you have to bring from both. Kamash on the pasuk that either one will fulfill the neder. That's really the end of the brisa. And now, in classical Gemara sense, we dive a little bit deeper. Amar Mar, says the Gemara, Taida minayin. Where do we know that a taida requires nisachim? Quoting the brisa, Tamlemer zevach. Frag the Gemara, really? Atu taida lav zevachu? Do we need this? Is the taida not called a zevach? What's the oi for? Why is the oi being marbe the taida? Says the Gemara, I would have think, since lamaisa, there is bread that is brought with it. Really? Why is it the ayil nazir think about the lechem, and yet ubayin nisachim? So why would you have a havamina by the taida that has lechem the zon nisachim? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Over there are 2 types of bread that are brought with the ayil nazir. That's why there's a din of nisachim. Whereas hacha arbas, meaning there are 4 types, so maybe there's no din of nisachim. Kamash Malan, that there is. Says the Gemara, 1 second, let the pasuk write it doesn't have to write Ayla. Why do we have to single out Ayla? Like Sivrachman Ayla says the Gemara, Avamina Vaziza Ma'yasha Isha Lashem Klal. I would have think you make a fire to Hashem as a klal. Lefali neder on a davar on the last narrow line is a prat. And then nacham olerech nichayach is chazaru klal. So what do you think? Klalu pradu klal yatadan el kena prat. Ma prat mefurash davar. Shenei bala alachet. What were all the cases that we were referring to? There's only things that are brought for an Aveira. So I would have thought, Av kol she'in ba'el alachet. Only that which comes for an Aveira, maybe that's when you require Nisachim. And then what? Oitzi chatas, I would exura chatas v'asham, she'hein ba'in alachet, that they, yes, come for an avera. Avi b'charu ma'aser Pesach she'in bayin alacheit. I'm going to include b'char ma'aser Pesach. They do not come for a chet. Tamalaymar oila. The Torah therefore says oila to exclude all cases of karbanos that are chiyuvim, even those that are not brought that for an avera. Says the Gemara, but wait, hashtalchsiv oilal klalu prat mar bisbase. And now, 1 second. So you add a klalu prat to klal. Then you have the actual pasuk oila. So now we flip it around. Now that you have the pasuk oila, so what's the klalu prat to klal coming to be marbe? Says the Gemara, ma bramafurash she'enai mechuyav v'oimid. The frat, which is the oila, is mafurash that what? It's talking about something that is not a case that one is not mechuyav. Avkol, so to every case, she'enai mechuyav v'oimid. What does this come to be, marbe? Lavi vladis kachim. This comes to include the vladis of karbanos to tmura sehem and their tmula and v'ilab hamin amaysarais v'asher shenitik l'ri'iyah v'chol azvachem shenizv'chu shalai lishman. Comes to marbe all those cases. Frek the Gemara 1 second. V'hash tadamid oil drasha. So now lemaisa, what are you teaching me? You're telling me that the word oy is for a drasha. Going back on the brisa. Why do we need that pasuk? And again, really, what's happening in the Gemara over here is we had a whole lengthy brisa with many psukim, and now the question is, why is every step necessary? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Lamali lachalkum. Why do we need oy? Lefali never oil in the dava lechalkam. Explains the Gemara. Itzrach. You know why? Salgadei techamina. Because I would think adamaisi neder unedava. I have to bring both. And excuse me. Adamaisi neder neder. You need both for what? For nesachim. Loyli by nesachim. That maybe the din of nesachim is only when you bring both. Kamash mlan. That even one of them. I see neder lechudei li by nesachim. As well, Lacy Nisachim says the Gemara 1 second. Oh, Michal Rav Yeshaya. Now we're going full circle back to the machlekes that we start off the day with on top of the Amid. According to Rav Yeshaya, understand. Elal Rav Yonasan Lamali. But what about according to Rav Yonasan? According to Rav Yonasan, the only time is when the Torah articulates Yachtov. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you what it is. I would think neder lechudei by nesachim, a neder by itself. Neder lechudei by nesachim, I see nedava lechudei li by nesachim. But I see neder unedava tiski b'nesachim dechad. Anaya havamina says of Yechon. You're right. Neder by itself would have nisachim. Nedava by itself would have nisachim. But what if I bring a neder and a nedava? Would there be two? Would there be one? So havamina would be that only one set of nisachim is needed. Kamash on the chiddush. To come to teach us that each one requires its own nisachim. Says the Gemara, why do we need the term? I would think I would think that the halacha that you bring seven nesachim is only when you bring an oila as a neder beneder ushlamim benedava inam yebcha avlecha dekamaisi oila ushlamim beneder inami or oila ushlamim benedava Shoim neder echad v'sheim nedava achasi, and therefore I'd have a half a min of tiskale b'nesachem dechad. Kamash malon, that it's not going to happen. That's why we need the pasuk of oy b'maya deichem, that each one needs its own set of nesachim, even when they're both the same neder. Says the Gemara, v'chisasa ben bakar oyloi zevach lamali. Why do we need a pasuk to say when you make a ben bakar, an oila, or a zevach? Says Gemara, I'll tell you, it's sal kedei techamina. I would think Hani meili echad kamaisi oilo shlamim beneder. Inami oilo shlamim benedava. Al echad kamaisi shtei oilos chad beneder v'chad benedava. Inami shnei shlamim echad benedava. Ema Shem Shlamim Achasi. I would think here for sure it's Shem Achasi. Shem Oila Achasi. This claim in the Sachem Dechad. Kamash Mlon. Then no, each one needs its own set of the Sachem. We continue the following Neder on the Davala Mali. Why do we need that? Pause like that. Chamina. Hani mi rechel meisi shtei Oila is Chadim Neder Chadim Nedava. Inami shtei Shlamim Chadim Neder Chadim Nedava. Aber echad kamaisi shtei oilos beneder shtei oilos benedava inam shtei shlamim beneder shtei shlamim benedava shem oila echadu shem nedarim echadu. You would think it's all the shem, one shem, only one set of nisachim. Who tiskelem nisachim dechad kamash malon. Then no, each one requires its own nisachim. For Rav Yishaya, as we wrap up the first part of today's shir, which really is wrapping up the end of yesterday's shir, this brisa. For Rav Yishaya, Imin Abakam and Hasan Lamali, Sagat the Chamina Hani Mili, betray Mini Avol Bechad Mina Tiskim Nesachim Dechad. Says Rav Yishaya would have thought that if it is 1 min, it would require 1 nisachim. No. And finally, kacha says lecha, so you should do for 1 lam. At least I would think that it's only b'zachar zeh is one. Each one has its own time nisachim. But v'zachas not kamash malon, that even and all scenarios requires each one having its own set of nisachim. Now it lines at the bottom of the 2 dots. We call them Mishnah Shachatasa Shal Mitzayra V'Hasham Ha'ita Nisachim. And I'm going to know this from the Tanu Rabbanon. Ushloisha Esrainim Soiles Mincha B'Mincha Ba'am HaZevach HaKosim Medaber. The pasuk is talking about the Mincha that comes with the Zevach. Atoimer b'mincha ba'im hazevach oinel b'mincha ba'im ne'atzmai. I would think atoimer that's only with a mincha with a zevach, or maybe it's a mincha by itself. Shoimer when the pasuk says va'elo kayin is oilav is a mincha v'oimer b'mincha ba'im ha'kesef ha'kos v'daber v'adayin any odem to nesachim. Fine, we have the extra riboy, but is there dinam nesachim v'imlav? Tamlay merviyayin the nesach aviyas ahin they all say al oila al zevach likavas echad oila zu likavas. Excuse me. Tamlay merviyayin the nesach aviyas ahin taseh al oila al zevach likavas echad. And we learn as follows. The Fasik says oila is what zu as mitzayra zevach zu chatas mitzayra oila zevach ay asha mitzayra ay zevach ay 1 second. Excuse me. Oila zu alas mitzayra. Zevach zu chatos mitzayra. Oila zevach zu asha mitzayra. That's exactly what we're up to. I just read it wrong. I'm sorry. I frak the Gemara of table tervayim zevach. Why don't we learn it all out? The chatos and the asham from the pasuk that says zevach. Ta'amar mar, as we have learned in a brisa, as we turn over to Sadi Aleph Mebeis chatos asha minayin. Ta'amar mar zevach. So why do we need to have 2 different words to teach? They both have a din of nisachim. Says the Gemara, when they're both the same, they're both brought for the same purpose. A nazir, zachatos, a nair, zir's asham, are both the same thing. However, in a scenario, but in a case, to asham la'achshir v'chatos l'chaper, if there's different functions to each carbon, Beinan, Trey cry, we need 2 different psukim. Says the Gemara, Zevach zuchatas, as we said at the bottom of the Amud, Mitzayra, Ve'im zuchatas, V'asham din nazir, Lo sakadetach, why not? Titania, Min chasim in this game, but Lasso v'shlama v'akasim edaber, Atam v'lasso v'shlama in el afilu chatas tam leimer, Ve'soayel, Yas Zevach shlama min chasim in iska, Ayel bechlal hayon. Ayel is included. Why is it singled out? Love to equate him. Ayel miuchad b'beneder zavav kol b'beneder unedava. So to everything comes from Never and Nedavar as a din of nesachim, which says achatas and asham and nazir not. Why? Because those are never brought beneder oy nedava. So the chatos and the asham of a nazir do not have a din of nisachim. Oy Zeva comes to teach us the chatos and the asham of the mitzayra. Says the Gemara Oyla, the pasuk said, Zu oylas mitzayra comes to include oylas mitzayra of vema zu oylas yoledis. Maybe it's the oyla of a woman that gives birth. Amar Abayi says Abayi oylas yoledis misefer they cry nafka. Already learned that from the end of the pasuk. The Tanya Rabbi Nasan Aimer like Kaveh zu oylas yoledis. Ha'echad zu echad aser shal meiser shekarav shlamim. Shalei matzinu la b'chol ha'Torah sheitafel chamar min ha'ikar. Says Gemara, you know why? Because we never could have that which is tafel is more chamar than the ikar. That the oila of someone who gives birth is included, and therefore we need the word ha'oila comes to include the oila of a mitzayra. Rav Amar, Ezeu davar zar shleisha ribuyin. What is something that requires 3 ribuyim? Havi oimer zu mitzayra. La'ayolam li. What do we need the pasuk of? La'ayolam Rav Sheishes Rabbis, the famous Eloi Shel Aharoin, the Ayol of Aaron HaKohen, that's brought on Yom Kippur, that also has a din of Nisachim. Frakti Gemara Eloi Shel Aharoin Moadechem Nafka. We know that from Moadechem, it's a yont of carbon. Salged Techamina, I would think, honey bili de tzibur, avol de yachid loy, but the Ayol of Aaron and Yom Kippur is not included. Therefore, it teaches me that there's Nesachim even there. Why would this be any different than Oilas Yoledes that has a din of Nesachim? I would think the Ayel of Yom Kippur, it's totally in the Zman. I would think Yom Eloi, there's no din of Nesachim. Pashon that there is. The rabbi says apalgos. Include apalgos in the nesachim of a ayol. And says the Gemara, apalgos is an interesting term, just we should point out. Apalgos is after the year passes, the 13th month is called a apalgos. Says the Gemara, Hanichal Rav Yechlan Damar Baryahu. This is going according to Rav Yechlan, says apalgos as a din of a barya, it's its own creation. Te'tanan, maybe Oila Nischaya, Yovin Oilalu, Vein Oila Loi Miziv Chayvam Rav Yechanan, Oila Ayel Rav apalgos. Elos, that makes a lot of sense. But Ela Parpade, but according to Parpade, Damar Maisi Umaisni, this fake says the case of the apalgos, you bring the Nesachim and the Mincha of the Ayel and you make it Tanai, because it's a suffix. It's a brother Abuye Sveika. The whole thing that you're bringing in just helps this interesting suffix. We're gonna have a special Ribuya Kra for that. Says the Gemara, you're right. It is indeed shver. According to Barpada, what do we need this extra pasuk for? Stop over here. I'll pick it up from the next Rosh and the next Shir B'siyata Dishmaya.